absolutely adore comedy. Growing up in the 1970s in the UK, we had 3 channels. It's not an enormous choice, and what my parents watched, I had to watch as well. So it was a simple rule. You didn't like it, you didn't watch it. Incredible, because I grew up with comedians like Dick Emery, Les Dawson, Morecambe and Wise, Larry Grayson. And you're thinking, well, they're all male stars. That's true. And it wasn't until around about the 1980s did female comedians really take off, especially on TV, with people like Victoria Wood, French and Saunders, and other artists. Comedy was changing from the 1970s for the traditional sort of joke-based comedy to alternative comedy. Things like The Young Ones and the arrival of Channel 4. With the arrival of Channel 4 and the comic strip Presents, I remember being about 11 or 12 and seeing one of the first programs they put on here was Five Go Mad in Dorset. Sitting down with my parents on a Saturday night, and we would watch people like Mike Yarwood, who was a fantastic impressionist, and this really influenced me and my sort of sense of humor, because later on, as I grew older, I started doing impressions of various famous people. I wrote my first joke when I was around about 6 years old, and I remember telling it, being very proud of myself that I'd come up with this joke, and I told it to my teacher at primary school. What happened to the Irishman who stole a toilet? He was feeling quite flushed. Also at primary school, I was given one of my first ever accolades by one of my teachers, and he said, and I remember very well, it was 1980, he said, "Philip Evans, you are the biggest clown in the 4th year." And I loved that because I could make people laugh at the age of 10. I found a report that my school teacher had written when I was the same age, around the age of 10, and it said, "Philip is a chatterbox, and he is also messy." 45 years later, that is exactly the same. I knew at that time I could make people laugh. For me, that was a positive thing, because if someone decided to pick on me or try and bully me, I would talk my way out of it or make a joke. And I still do that to this day. But comedy had a special place. Watching the comedians as I grew up, I just loved the idea that you could make people laugh on a bigger scale rather than just the classroom and being the class clown. I got really interested in how people created characters, how people would write jokes and the structure of a joke. So obviously my joke that I first came up with obviously needed a lot of work, and perhaps scrapping and starting again. One of my favourite comedians again in the 70s and 80s was Benny Hill. He became extremely popular around the world, not just in the UK, because obviously his jokes were visual jokes, and that can translate into any language. I found him very funny because his visual jokes were just excellent. He would take something quite mundane and make it into just something very funny. I loved the ending of the Benny Hill show. It's one of the things that I always look forward to, and the chase. And I always wanted to reenact this sort of thing where you get chased, and it's funny because it's a line where, and people will follow the line. It's not as if it's a straight line or somebody's running. It's like everybody's in it. It really makes me laugh. Even now, all these years, it's still very funny. One of the things I noticed that the comedians were male, and it was only when you got into round about the beginning and the mid-80s that people like Victoria Wood came along. She wrote sketches that seemed to be very bizarre and very surreal in their sort of comedy. One of the things I heard that she did with one of her most famous sketches called Two Soups, and she'd based this on observing a lady that was in a cafe on the seaside, and it was empty, this place, and she built a sketch around how funny it was to see this old lady just come walk back and forwards to a table. Now, you probably would, on a paper, you probably wouldn't think that was funny, but she knew how to craft that sketch because she knew the capabilities of Julie Walters. She knew how good it would be just to get somebody to walk from a door to a table. And that's really, really good comedy, being able to know what the people that you work with can do and how funny it was. In her head, she had that in her mind. She knew exactly what she was doing. You had a lot of people coming up from educated backgrounds where they'd been to Oxford's, Cambridge, and they got into comedy. Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry were part of that. And again, their sort of surreal comedy really resonated with me, especially in the late 80s and 90s. And when I found some friends that shared this sort of silly sense of humour with me, it's such a bonding experience. Because I was a part of a church and part of a youth group, I met people who shared that sort of common ground of comedy. I love doing sketches and drama and making up things. And I think coming from a household where comedy really, it wasn't, center stage. Yes, we used to watch it on a Saturday night on TV, but my parents didn't have that sort of sense of humour. And me going into a group of people that I met, it was a great experience because I could get together with people who had that same sense of humour as me. And two of my friends that I call my best friends now still have that sense of humour. And I think that's one of the things that attracted me to these people, that they could be just as silly as I would, and probably worse, and make each other laugh. I think one of the funniest things ever to do is make someone laugh in a time when you know you shouldn't. So going to church as a teenager, it was a very serious thing. And my friend Dave, we would try and make each other laugh. And the connection that we had with each other was that you could just say a word or even make a noise, and you knew that you could make that other person laugh. One of the funniest programs I found in the 1980s was a program called Allo Allo. It was about a cafe owner in France during the Second World War. And again, you probably think, well, really? You could make a joke about that? But it was so funny. And again, the idea of being politically correct came in, and people were a bit dubious about it. I remember telling a friend, saying that, I'd been watching this program called Laurel, and she said, oh, no, I don't watch that. I said, why not? She said, well, it's politically, it's not very, makes fun of races and, the French, the German. I said, well, it makes fun of all nationalities. You had people in it that were portrayed in a certain way. And to me, it was harmless. It wasn't being nasty, and it wasn't being hateful in its content. It was just making fun and light of a situation that was pretty awful. Comedy isn't just about telling jokes. It's making that connection between you and the audience. It's a very, very intense sort of feeling. If you can come out with a one-liner and make people laugh, you know that you are accepted. You are part of the tribe. And for me, that was very, very personal. the idea that I was going to be accepted. My parents didn't really have a sense of humour. My dad certainly didn't. My mum did to a certain extent. It used to infuriate my mother. So if I'd go out and I would be in a shop and I would talk to somebody, and if it was making somebody laugh, my mum would be scolding me, saying, telling me off. Even in my 30s and 40s, she used to go mad because she thought it was a sign of somebody being very immature. That I like the Carry On films, which was a British institution from the 1950s up to the 1970s of puerile, immature, innuendo-based seaside comedy postcard sort of thing. And I loved it, and it's still, to this day, they make me laugh. I find it really sad as well, though we don't have the good comedy programs that we used to have. And by that I mean that I know that people will jump on this bandwagon and say, well, you can't say this, you can't say that. Well, you can. It's just how you say it and what you say at the time. I think people like Ricky Gervais, people who really do push the boundaries of what is acceptable. He's very good at making jokes about very, very serious issues. People say there are certain subjects that you shouldn't joke about. I think that's wrong. You can make a joke about anything you want to. It's how you go about that joke. Crass sort of base humour for me isn't particularly appealing. For me, comedy is very much like fashion. While a certain type of comedy will be funny for a certain length of time, you look at more recent programs, comedians like Rowan Atkinson, who created Mr. Bean. Again, a very, very funny character that was internationally known because he didn't need language. He could be very, very funny in his physicality. Anyway, that's my little point of view about comedy. Next, I'll be talking about films, music, books, whatever it is. I haven't decided which topic I want to talk about, but that's what comedy means to me. It means laughing and having a connection with one another.